That was David Bowie, even though it might have sounded a little bit like David Seville. It's a cool tune, Laughing Gnomes. And they are, apparently, fun to be around. The nature people love to be a part of our lives. They want to be a part of our families. They might be in your homes right now. So how do you find them? What are the techniques to help locate some of the elves, the leprechauns, the fairies, the brownies, etc., that live around us? We'll get into that coming up next hour. Also, I got to get back to, did they come over with us when Western Europeans came to what is now the United States? Who was existing here before? Are there native leprechauns, so to speak, and then also leprechauns that come from the old country too? And how does everybody get along? That was David Bowie, even though it might have sounded a little bit like David Seville. It's a cool tune, Laughing Gnomes. And they are, apparently, fun to be around. The nature people love to be a part of our lives. They want to be a part of our families. They might be in your homes right now. So how do you find them? What are the techniques to help locate some of the elves, the leprechauns, the fairies, the brownies, etc., that live around us? We'll get into that coming up next hour. Also, I got to get back to, did they come over with us when Western Europeans came to what is now the United States? Who was existing here before? Are there native leprechauns, so to speak, and then also leprechauns that come from the old country too? And how does everybody get along in this nature world? Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Christian von Lauer and Christopher Valentine, co-authors of a series of books, including something we have to talk more about, A Gnome's Story. This is the first book officially written by a gnome or by a series of gnomes,
yes,
gentlemen?
That is the first book in the world written by a series of gnomes, as well as 2 fairies. We have 2 elves also that write in that book, as well as some leprechauns.
Okay.
The reason for the title is that the image on the front depicts the first gnome that came to our awareness, whose name is Peter John. He tends to actually be somewhat psychic, and that's how we found out that they were telepathic. And so he sort of started the idea of telling their story. So he sort of gets most of the glory in that first book, and his images on the cover.
But that's not a photograph of a real gnome on the cover.
That is a photograph. Yeah. That's a photograph of a model that we found that looks like him. We take sometimes 4 to 8 years to find someone who has the face that actually represents those that we're connecting with. So it's a very, very lengthy process.
And then along the way, too, seeing and sensing gnomes. Let me go back to the sort of the gnome nation idea that there are native gnomes or native nature people. Are there also nature people who have come here from other countries, like you would say the traditional sort of Irish broguing leprechaun that's here?
Yes.
Okay.
We asked the leprechauns that. We said, did you really come from Ireland? And they said yes. There are some leprechauns, though, that come from the different areas of the United Kingdom, like England, but Ireland is associated with the name leprechauns and those type of nature spirits, just as gnomes are associated with the Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Scandinavian area countries, even, what's that other country that they're... people know they're from? They're
sort of from all over, Chris. It's a misconception to try and say they came from one area. Because people came from those countries over to this country, they followed them, and they came with them because they tend to stay associated with those humans that they relate to. But everywhere in the world before those peoples came over here, they were nature people also. In the Americas, the Incas, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Inuits, all had nature people and have stories about them, and it's in their architecture and their history. In Machu Picchu, they had them. The Cherokee Little People here in the area that we live in, the Yunwi Sundi, I think they're called, were here long before anyone arrived.
The Indians especially know about the nature spirits, and they have a very close association with them. So anywhere you go in the United States, like, for instance, the Cherokee of North Carolina, you ask the Indians about the nature people, and they know about them. And so they were here already in the United States, but a lot of the nature people that live in Europe did come over as well.
The Manuhini is a type of nature, a little people of Hawaii, for example, which is very much indigenous to just the Hawaiian group.
And it's interesting that Americans really don't know as much about the nature spirits as the other countries do. And every country, if you look at their culture, has nature spirits. But if you go to Ireland, for example, we get people that come to our booth from Ireland all the time, and some of them are kind of matter-of-fact about it. They say, oh, yeah, we see fairies all the time, no big deal. And I think part of that is because it's so much part of their culture, and part of seeing nature spirits is being very open-minded. And if you go to Ireland, there could be some energy differences, too, because even Americans that go over there see fairies and leprechauns very easily. But it's also so much a part of their culture in Europe. They very much believe in the nature.
I know you're going to have questions, Ian, but I just wanted to mention also, keep dropping one thing. There is a very strong Siberian connection to nature people as well, and I mention that because in the books they tell a number of stories about that. Okay, I know you've got a question or two.
Okay, how about 8? All right, so do they all get along?
Nature people are fun-loving people. They are not dense like we are. We have a lot of density to our existence, but yet we could look through a microscope and see that there were things inside of us, and we can even be atomic and see that there are electrons and protons. So we're not really solid, but we are dense.
Do they conflict? I mean, are there ever?
I'm going to tell you why they don't.
Okay,
I have to prove it to you. See, they don't conflict because they haven't learned to. It takes a lifetime living in a dense matter in order to develop those traits. So they would accept almost any answer. For example, they wouldn't get upset or mad about anything if you were communicating with them. They don't have it in their nature to do that, just like a plant wouldn't.
I have a mental model and this is obviously influenced by Tolkien, but there in The Lord of the Rings and other stories, you have sort of these, what were then in that model considered kind of magical creatures that were fighting against each other. That doesn't happen?
No, that doesn't happen, except you have to remember wherever there were peoples, there were nature people. And before this race of man, there was an Atlantean race and there was a Lemurian race. I really think a lot of the Tolkien stories goes back to Lemurian times when everybody was warlike, in which case the nature people were there supporting those whom they related to, but they didn't act out in the way they showed them in those stories.
Are they nationalistic?
They are in an interesting way. They're very mimic oriented. That's why they have jobs. For example, they want so badly to be human like that they tend to mimic everything. So whatever country you're in, they will tend to adopt that nationality. They'll tend to try and play with the religion. They'll try and fit into the culture, but they will look different too. For example, in Australia, some gnomes have a yellow stripe on them. In South America, some of them have multiple colored faces. Here, they tend to look more like we see them in our books or on the Travelocity gnome, that type of thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do they? And they actually do sort of look like that.
They're smaller. They tend to wear hats that are conical. As they get older, they develop a white beard. But that beard that's shown in most gnomes, that comes very late in life because gnomes age so slowly, and then they suddenly get older. So when you're seeing the gnomes with the white beard, usually those are the older ones.
Okay. I mean, this is sort of a politically incorrect comment, but other than Hermann Goering, were there, say, Nazi fairies? Were there, during times like, I mean, were there fairies or gnomes or elves that stayed true to, say, Hitler's Germany?
Never in that regard, because their association is never with the culture or never with the country or the politics. It's always, the association is always with an individual. So Goering, for example, would have at least 2 gnomes that very much loved and cherished him, and they would have known him in many lifetimes, and so they know him as a greater person than he was in that instance. So their tie is going to be to the individual.
But gnomes have made it very clear that they don't think you should ever hurt anybody. So that whole Hitler regime, they were completely against.
They're against that.
Absolutely. Any reference to that, and I remember when something that came up for the first time about that, and the gnomes said, "Oh no," they said, "You should never hurt anybody." So they're very much against that.
You have to realize too, as you experience and work with them, that the nature people are trying to get an effect from you. They want to get the feeling of your being happy, fulfilled, healthy, those types of things, because they're responsible for you. So whatever affects those qualities does affect them.
Okay. And then that brings us to that question then that sort of has been bubbling under this conversation from the very beginning. You address it in the book, Seeing and Sensing Gnomes. How do we, what are the techniques that we might use to open ourselves up to being able to be in relationship with any of the nature spirits / nature people that are in our lives?
Well, Ian, the number one thing that you can do to help yourself see nature spirits, and this is really the perfect time of year to practice this, is if you don't have them already, is get yourself strings of miniature Christmas lights and place them in your bushes if you'd like to see gnomes and elves, and up in the trees if you'd like to see and practice seeing fairies. And the reason for this is the nature people all resonate to different color frequencies. And, for example, gnomes resonate to the colors green and red. And what they will do is they will use the energy from those lights as well as the background twigs and leaves to help them come in more clearly for you to see them.
You know, in the New Age movement, we speak of the four elements, and those are associated with man. Nature people tend to associate with one or two of them. And so Chris mentioned the earth earlier, and the colors red and green together in combination is what they're going for. It's like a chord of music. The leprechauns, gold and green works well for them. White and green is what the elves will resonate with. Fairies like pale colors, like pale yellow, pale green, pale pink, and pale blue. But together, as if it makes a chord, that frequency is what they resonate with. The reason this is important is because it's just like bringing in spirits from the other side. It's hard to prove it to people because most people can't see them. They will try and help make themselves visible, but they can only go so far. They can't be human. So if you'll actually provide those colors, you've provided a lot of the energy that they resonate with already. So then they'll use that and add to it to show you their outline and shape.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy for them to come in. So it helps if you can do like a meditation and raise your spirituality, and they will kind of come down in their realm a little bit and take on more of our physical matter. So you're not going to see them in full detail and full color all the time. But this is one of the methods that you can use that will really help them come in more clearly. And how you know you're not making up the whole thing when you start seeing little gnome hats in your Christmas tree or in your trees outside is you can ask them to move, ask them to wave their hand. Sometimes when you turn away and you look back again, they will have completely changed their pose.
Now,
okay.
There are only two problems. Should I go on, Ian, or do you want to ask a question?
One quick question before you get to the problems, because mine was a problem-related question. Mm-hmm. Are they sensitive to the extreme cold and wind, for example, that we're experiencing, say, in the upper Midwest?
They only would have the experiences of discomfort if they made themselves denser. So if they're going all out to make themselves appear in full color, and you can see the depth to them, then they've actually become more dense. They've taken on more matter of this particular plane, in which case they would be more susceptible. But in their realm, being etheric, which is an energy of this plane, but it's lighter than air, they won't feel the effects of those things. For example, when you speak to them, they don't really hear audibly because they're not dense. They don't feel that physical vibration, but they do pick it up telepathically, another energetic way.
That's how we communicate with them in the books, through telepathy.
Okay. And then you had another problem you wanted to bring up, Christian?
Yes. The two things we always have to overcome. You know, this used to take us weeks to teach people to see them a decade ago. But we managed to fine-tune it down to 2 hours. I find that there's two problems, one with the eyes and one with the subconscious mind. The eyes is actually an easier problem to overcome. We have rods and cones in our eyes, and this is a scientific fact, and we use these rods and cones to see different ways The rods will actually allow us to get depth, and the cones will allow us to get depth, and the rods will actually allow us to see more two-dimensionally. We actually want to just use the rods. So you have to do something to trick the mind. You have to somehow take depth out of what you're looking for, in which case then your mind will be comfortable looking with just the rod portion of the eye. So the colors that Chris mentioned helps, but another way is to look into a deep bush. Let's say you have a thick green bush that has flowering plants on it. Because your mind knows that there's depth there, it will try and not look for that third dimension, in which case you'll be able to see nature people easier because they should show up two-dimensionally. Your mind will add that third dimension. So we have to overcome that problem. Okay. Now, the mind doesn't want to see nature people. I meet millions of people, thousands of people, I should say, and they say, I really want to see them. But it turns out that they're somewhat afraid of seeing something they haven't seen before.
Oh, I'd be all for it.
Yeah. So I usually ratchet them up to it. And like I said, I'll bring in spirits, and everybody will see spirits, and perhaps a master. We've even brought in people from heaven, and they have different characteristics, so we actually know what region they're coming from. For example, the colors that they look, and we'll have them move around. But we have to get people comfortable with the idea of seeing spiritual form to begin with, so they accept that concept. We even start earlier. We actually let them see the energy around their own bodies first, so that their mind won't be fighting us. And it's the last thing that we do is when we start bringing in nature people. Otherwise, the mind will say, no, I'm not used to seeing those things, so I'm not going to see them. And the reason I say this is because most people do see and experience them now, but the subconscious mind is not telling you that you're seeing them.
Okay.
So you see them indirectly. You see birds or bees or something like that.
So we will replace in our minds, something that's familiar when actually what we're seeing is something that's natural, right, but appears to be kind of magical, and our minds will recognize that even before we do, and replace it with an acceptable, non-scary image.
You do that since you were a child. This is why children could see these things more easily, and children could see spirit more easily too. They haven't learned that they're not supposed to, so they're not blocking it. But the subconscious mind is only doing it because it's been told to do this. It's been trained to make you have these same experiences as your neighbor.
But when we do our workshops, children are usually in the first row, and they're almost always the first to see the nature spirits come in. But if you really are not able to come to our workshops, Ian, check out that second book, because that book called Seeing and Sensing Gnomes, that's almost entirely methods that the nature spirits themselves give to you on how to see them, hear them, and communicate with them. And then their new book, The Magic of Gnomes and Leprechauns, that you also have, that also has many brand new techniques that the nature people have put in there to help humans see them, because they know people really want to learn how to see them. And as well, for the first time, no one's ever done this before, is teach people how to see fire nature spirits, which are the salamanders, and water nature spirits, which are sprites, mermaids, mermen, and undines.
Okay. Then you say they're always around us. Should we be self-conscious when we get naked? Like take a shower or something like that?
Yeah, that's the same question we have about nature. About spirits too. Actually, there are more people in spirit form than there are us here in physical, and there are a lot more nature people. There are actually 6,000 different kinds of nature people. So first of all, there's a large quantity of them compared to us. Now, the reason you don't have to be self-conscious is because they've learned to ignore us. They have tried for so many years of your life to get your attention that they know it's not likely that you're going to be looking at them today. So they develop this attitude of just sort of ignoring. They hang around and will check it out and see if they get your attention, but they're used to you not seeing them. Here's an example. When I first started trying to see them, I went through rituals. I didn't know what to do, so I went through all these different nature rituals, something to the earth, a ritual to the air, to try and invoke them. Not that I knew that would work, but I wanted to get into the mode there. And towards the last day, I think it took me 3 days, I was sitting in a pool of water. It was like a hot tub that we had outside because I was trying to be in nature, and I wanted to be in each of the elements. So I'm sitting in this hot tub doing a little ritual that I wrote up to invoke the nature people, and this is when I first saw a gnome. He actually came walking by, and started throwing things into this hot tub. He was throwing in clothes. He actually was taking advantage of it to do laundry. And he had this long stick, and he's turning it around. But he ignored me, and I almost, I must have jumped 6 foot out of the water. And when I landed, the splash didn't even bother him. But he just learned to ignore it.
If they're not happening to be walking past a hot tub, where did the gnomes do their laundry ordinarily?
Well, they'll do it in lakes and creeks. Okay. They're always associated with water. One of the most important things that gnomes mention is they need water.
Okay. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Well, then that brings us to A Gnome's Story, one of the books from Christopher Valentine and Dr. Christian von Lauer, and we'll ask about that then. The gnomes' story. What did the gnomes and the elves and the fairies, what did they need to tell us? What was so important for them to be able to sit down and to write out a book? Okay. The only book of its kind. We'll get to that coming up next. What are the messages we need to know coming up next on Coast to Coast AM? This is Ian Punnett. That's music by the Pixies. I gotta love that. And that's what we're learning, that pixies and brownies and elves and leprechauns and the entire nature nation is all around us at all times. So what did the gnomes have to say in the first ever book written by gnomes? Next, with Dr. Christian von Lauer and Christopher Valentine on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So back with Christian von Lauer and Christopher Valentine, who will be taking your calls coming up at the top of the hour. And I know that there are so many people who just can't wait, but they're just going to have to. But first, what were the gnomes so interested in telling you all in the book A Gnome's Story?
Well, I'll just give you a brief idea of in the first book. They really want to let people know the different types of foods and drinks you could put out for them in the garden. This is the gnome story. How to set up different areas in your home and garden for them. For example, how to build a fairy house from the fairies themselves, and how to have them as a part of your family like we did.
That's a relational purpose, but they had some serious purposes too, Ian. Let's go back to those 7 planes of consciousnesses and archangels that we talked about at the very beginning of the show. And we said the archangels were put in charge of the different planes that we live in and exist in. We're only in the physical now, but we go over to the astral when we pass over, for example.
Right.
All those planes represent different levels of energy, different densities of energy.
Right.
Every atom that exists in this physical plane actually is surrounded with energy of those 7 planes. So every atom that we're aware of actually represents energy from those different planes. And that's why spirit exists here, nature people exist here. We're all sort of intermixed. We just relate to our own energies. Here's the problem. Their energy is etheric, which is simply the top part of the physical plane energy. Everything that we do in this world affects them. Like I said, if we built a house, that's now going on top of the etheric force that they had, for example. And when we drive our cars and build highways and roads, you're building them through an environment that they used to live and function in. So they no longer have use of that because it's changing. Every time they wake up, something's changed. So as I mentioned, they realized that they had to somehow make themselves more apparent to us now. And although they've been trying to do that all along, they've actually had to make a concerted effort to make us aware of them so that they could do things that we can't do, and we'll do things for them. For example, we do cooking. That's great. They love homemade foods, breads, things, so they won't do the cooking anymore. But when that computer breaks and you have no idea how to fix it, their people will go to work on that. They don't go to AT Institute, but right. They have some way of getting that to work.
How do they do that? Because that sounds like magic then. If they haven't, I mean, you wouldn't think that they would have a technical background for that.
Well, magic is simply what we don't know. Just the mystery, the stuff that we don't know yet. They do know a lot of these things because anything that functions in this universe is actually nature. That's really what the universe is nature. They know how to do things that we don't. So they manifest better than we can. They can get it to go back to its original plan, which is what they work on.
Nature spirits are really, really good with working with electricity and mechanical things. And we kind of tested that out once. We had to go to a show where we had to go on by plane, and we had 3 things broken at the time. We had a ceiling fan that wasn't working. We had a hot tub outside where the motor wasn't working anymore. And what was the third thing that we had?
I don't recall. It seems like everything breaks.
Oh, we also had that the air conditioner in the car wasn't working, and we said, let's try this out. Nature spirits, can you help us with fixing these things? And when we came back, the ceiling fan somehow we turned the switch, and it turned on, and it was just... that was amazing to us. The jacuzzi was working again. We thought we were going to have to replace the whole thing. And the car air conditioner, when we got back from the airport and we got in the car, that was working too.
That's funny. When we do a lot of bookstores, something will always happen, like it will break. But we think sometimes they do that to get our attention. We'll say, geez, we want to ring up all these book sales, but the cash register doesn't work. And they say, can the leprechauns help? And within about 30 seconds, everything starts working. This happens all the time. But even more dramatically, when we go to all these shows, we have all this luggage and books that we're carrying around. When we go to the carousels at the airport to get our luggage, ours will always be the first that comes up, but it gets more dramatic. The turnstile will...
Wait. They're always the first that comes up?
Very nearly always.
Okay.
Rarely will it not be. But it gets better. That thing will turn around. The carousel will turn around, and it will stop right in front of me. Shall I take my luggage off? Then it will take off by itself.
And I'm usually the one getting the car while this is going on, and I've heard this story over and over from Christian, and I thought, you know what, I've got to see this for myself. I'm going to stay and wait for the luggage, and of course, his luggage was, I think it was the first luggage that came up. If not, it was the second. And then here it comes down the carousel around to where he is, and the whole mechanism actually stopped. He was able to get his luggage off, and it started again. I was just absolutely...
We do exposition. This is Christian again. We do expositions all over the country, Ian, and sometimes they can have many thousands of people attending in their 2 or 3 stories. So and we have no time between events, so I have to try and get up this escalator through these thousands of people up to room 324.
Right.
And I can't get through this crowd of people, so the leprechauns will make it stop. Everybody gets off the escalator. They think it's broken. I step on. It takes off. And I go to the top and make my event.
But they're helping people all the time. A lot of people feel like it's the angels that are helping them, and what we have found out is the gnomes have told us that they are the ones helping people get the parking spots. When you're looking for one, you can't find one, and you're calling on the angels, they're really good at that. The fairies have told us they're the ones leaving the feathers for you or influencing the leaving of feathers for you. They also said when you call on the angels, the fairies come in first to make the way for the angels. And the leprechauns have told us that they're the ones that make the lights turn green for you and can help you get from point A to point B very easily and smoothly.
Now the leprechauns are probably the most magical, Ian, because they can do something that the other nature people cannot. They are the only nature people that actually transcend this physical plane and do go into the astral plane. Because of that, we have the effect of things popping in and out. For example, people's keys go missing, or anything magical where we actually make things manifested, or especially when things pop in and out, that's an effect of a leprechaun. Because they actually can go into another dimension where time doesn't quite work the same, and make that occur.
Okay. As for the name leprechaun, I meant to ask you earlier, that's a Celtic word, correct?
Right.
Okay. Do they call themselves leprechauns?
They will call themselves whatever works for the community that they're in. For example, in there are Afrikis, I think, in Egypt. There's the Jinn in the Arab countries.
I see. So they would be that, and jinn I always thought of as male genies, and I thought of them as wish granters. Is that not true?
It is. It's just that those are the characteristics that came through the most in stories, that leprechauns can grant wishes. Not that that's specifically what they're trying to do. Leprechauns, because they're telepathic like all nature people, hear what's going on in their mind. And when they hear something that they think is selfless, and little children get the best response, when they hear something that's selfless, they will often try and make that come about.
For example, say Christian's talking about little children. They have told us that little girls, they like to help their wishes come true because they're thinking of their mother maybe that is sick, and their wish is that their mother get well or that their father get a job. Things like that. They like to grant wishes that are selfless, but they also told us, Ian, that they said, don't be going telling those people that they can't be wishing for something big and shiny and wonderful too. So they're out to grant wishes for everybody, and and sometimes it's in ways that you couldn't even have conceived of. That's even better than you could have thought of.
And I really think, this is Christian again, I really think that's what wishes are about to them. They're not so concerned about the new car or a new boyfriend or clothes. They really know you because they're telepathic. They know you from many lifetimes too. So they deep down try and bring about those things that will make you be healthier or make you be fulfilled in a relationship, purposeful in life.
They're really great at helping you find your soulmate and helping you with relationships and maintaining relationships as well.
Okay. Tell me about the when we were going back to the luggage conversation, did the leprechauns or the gnomes or whomever it was that was helping you with your luggage, were they indigenous to the carousel at the airport, or were they traveling with you?
Well, the answer is both, because we have ours that travel with us, and they stay in communication with the leprechauns and elves that work in the different cities. This is why when you're going to travel, and I think we did a section on flying with gnomes, they like to know in advance because they sort of work it out all the way down the route. But when you arrive at an airport, for example, you're expected.
It's amazing because they're in the etheric form, but they're right there with luggage handlers there to help the gnomes that are with us, and it's all been planned out, they've told us. So that's what makes the trips go so smoothly. When you're working with the nature people and you have them as part of your life really does become more magical and things go much smoother.
That reminds me of such a cute story. When we first started flying with them, remember I said they try to mimic things that
sure.
we in the physical world?
Right.
So they see that we got this new luggage that has wheels on it so we could move more things easily. So they decided to make their own, and it looked like it was a little off. For example, one side of the luggage thing would have a bicycle wheel, the other side would have a skate wheel. Some of them had free wheels on it. So they can't create exactly the way we do, but you'll find that they are so whimsical and imaginative in their recreation process. They make tennis shoes because they see all the tennis shoe commercials, but they might have 6-inch soles on them, for example.
Like Elton John.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay. So then what were some of the things that the gnomes felt? I mean, are there specific quotes or things that, as you think about a gnome's story, sort of gnome wisdom, or these missives from this astral plane that the gnomes and the elves felt that we needed to hear about in your book, A Gnome's Story? Yeah,
the most important one, the underlying one, is they want us to realize that we're evolving people and that there will be a time when we, physical humans, will become lighter and we will no longer have a use for this earth. So they have two parts to say. They want us to take care of it, keep it clean, keep the environment clean, keep the air clean. But for a reason, they will now become more dense, and they are going to inherit what we leave them. So this is why we have so many communications from many people that talk to nature people of keep the air clean, don't use pesticides. They want us to leave the earth in a good condition for them.
Fairies especially are concerned with the environment. If you talk to fairies, they're almost always going to be the most adamant about taking care of the environment.
Are there White House fairies, gnomes, etc.?
Well, yes, of course, there's going to be gnomes everywhere. In fact, we just did a story for the fourth book on Oprah gnomes, because when we went to see Oprah Studios, we noticed that there was a ring of gnomes around one of the top landings in the building, around the glass doors inside, and they were all in white coats, and they had tone-on-tone logos on their coats. Yeah.
Well, the reason I ask is I would think that if there were a gnome hierarchy, that only the best gnomes, or the ones that were considered the most important gnomes, would be the ones that would be in a place of power, like someplace like the White House.
That's true, and we did cover that in the first book. We asked them about that, and the gnomes that are speaking in the first book, and I think we have about 24 of them. They're usually children, and they're like the prodigies of the clan, and it's like a special honor to live in your home with you and interact with you, and it's not such a bad thing, though, that the other gnomes, the regular type gnomes, if you want to call them that, still work out in the fields and do kind of like the hard labor that most people think of gnomes doing. But there is kind of a hierarchy in a way.
It would be a misconception, though, to think that it's a status or power hierarchy like ours.
Okay.
The ones that are the leaders of the clans and the kingdoms in the gnome and elf kingdoms, for example, are simply the ones that have lived the longest. So they've accumulated the greatest amount of wisdom and are able to share that in the most consistent way, because consistency of wisdom is something very important to both gnomes and elves. They don't vary their wisdom like we do. Now, the New Age movement, we tend to have notions. There's a lot of philosophy behind what we believe, but we all tend to have our own take on it. That doesn't work for the nature people that try to be extremely consistent. So the elders have wisdom, and so they get respect for their age.
And it's like law. When an elder speaks, the gnomes don't question it, and that is kind of what you were talking about earlier. It's the children and the adults listen to the elders without question, and they can't really understand why humans have to kind of reinvent the wheel and have to try to figure everything out themselves, because they've seen us through many lives, because they live such long lives, and it's like, well, here they go again. They've got to learn everything all over again.
It's actually intriguing, isn't it, that the nature people have so much wisdom, and yet they seem to be less evolved than we are. The reason for that is because their lives are so long, and they've evolved and seen through many stages of this earth, and seen people through many stages, and because they don't change their wisdom, they collect it. The elves, by the way, are the ones that collect and record the records and the information. So they just follow it religiously, so to speak.
And it's just their wisdom is so incredible, and I never expected it when we started communing with nature people. And there's so much deep meaning to their words. When you're reading the books, there's so many entendres and extra deep meanings, and it's just to me it's the most incredible books, because I've never even conceived that they could be this smart.
The kingdoms, then, the elf kingdom you made a reference to, then it's kind of a meritocracy, as opposed to there's some sort of royal elfin bloodline.
Right. It's
okay.
actually the kingdoms. Well, let me do it this way. The kingdoms tend to be constructed territorially. So every region has its kingdom because of the territory itself, not based on the people themselves.
But there's no king of elfin kings.
There is, but in this regard, first of all, Gob or Geb, which would be the Egyptian word, which might, by the way, we think has a connection to Archangel Uriel, tends to be the king of all kingdoms. But the nature people break their kingdoms down, first of all, by element association. So there's an earth kingdom, there's an air kingdom, a fire spirit kingdom, and a water kingdom. Now, within those kingdoms, because the territories can be so vast, for example, Siberia, they can also have kings also. But in that case, the characteristics of the people have changed. So the snow gnomes, for example, would be quite different than the sand gnomes or a lot of the gnomes in America. Because the differences are so stark and extreme, they can have their own structure.
Okay. If there are... Do we all have guardian angels?
We do all have a guardian angel, but we do not all see them. When I see a guardian angel, when I do readings, because I'm a clairvoyant medium, which is what I primarily do, when I see a guardian angel visibly behind someone, they show up as the brightest of all the forms that come in, and I will see them right away. And that guardian angel tells me one thing: something has occurred in that person's life that threatened it. Something unnatural could have happened where the person was in an auto accident, where something might have shortened his life, and that differs from the plan. So that's when they become evident, because that guardian angel will now never leave your side.
Guardian angels only come in if you're in like a near-death experience where it's not your time to go. They will make sure that you get through it.
Okay. Because it sounds like I have this astral entourage behind me.
You
and
do.
It's a lot like the Verizon commercial or whatever.
Everybody has two